Hi, my name is J.R. Jacobs. I'm a student at Lick Wilmerding High School in San Francisco, where I study architecture. I am also a volunteer at the Stanford Building Decarbonization Learning Accelerator. In this video, we will explore topics such as environmental racism, redlining and its impacts on communities located near pollution sources, inequitable responses to climate disasters, and the high energy costs faced by people of color, also known as energy burden. We'll also explore how environmental justice and efforts to reduce carbon emissions are connected by showing how environmental hazards, systemic racism, and decarbonization affect marginalized communities, especially people of color. Finally, we'll discuss some emerging solutions to these problems, including policy changes and equitable decarbonization initiatives. I'd like to give a special thanks to Dr. Anthony Kinslow II for his expert guidance on this video and extensive wisdom on the subject of environmental justice and equitable decarbonization. Dr. Kinslow is the founder and CEO of Gemini Energy Solutions, a lecturer at Stanford University, and a guest speaker for the Stanford BDLA. Did you know that 40% of global carbon emissions come from building construction and operations? That means that buildings are a huge negative contributor to climate change. Building decarbonization involves the design of new buildings and the retrofitting of existing buildings so that they contribute zero or near zero carbon emissions. Building decarb relies heavily on energy efficiency and is focused on eliminating the use of fossil fuels in buildings through electrification and the use of renewable power. However, there is another important aspect to building decarbonization beyond just reducing carbon emissions. In the words of Dr. Kinslow, although learning the technical aspects of decarbonizing our built environment is critical, ensuring that decarbonization is equitable and just for all people is just as important. Environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. This isn't just an issue of economic privilege, it's also a critical environmental justice and human health issue. Communities of color, especially Black communities in the U.S., bear a disproportionate burden of harmful effects associated with fossil fuel usage. Black people are 75% more likely than white people to live in fence-lined communities located right next to industrial facilities where noise, odor, pollution, and traffic directly affect the people living nearby. Additionally, almost 7 million Black Americans live in counties with oil and gas refineries, which have been shown to increase the risk of cancer due to air pollution and cause higher rates of asthma, especially in Black children. How in the world did we get to a place of such injustice? Redlining is a discriminatory practice where services such as banking, insurance, and access to jobs are denied to people living in neighborhoods labeled as high risk. These labels were often based on the racial or ethnic makeup of the area. The term redlining comes from the red lines drawn on maps by banks and insurance companies to mark the areas considered too risky for investment, which mostly impacted Black and minority communities. Redlining is an example of institutionalized racism. Institutionalized racism refers to discriminatory policies and practices within specific institutions, such as schools, banks, or law enforcement, that result in unequal treatment of different racial groups. Redlining started in the U.S. in the 1930s with Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, which created maps to help guide the granting of home loans. These maps graded neighborhoods ranking from A, the best, to D, the worst. Neighborhoods with mostly minority or low-income residents were given a D grade and labeled as red. Because of this, banks and other institutions refused to give people in the D-graded areas loans to buy or fix up homes, claiming that it was too risky. This restricted the flow of investment into these neighborhoods, which suppressed economic growth and housing development. Although redlining practices like those of the HOLC have ended, the effects of redlining still have profound and lasting impacts on the economic, social, and environmental well-being of marginalized communities today. Redlining caused the government and businesses to neglect and avoid investing in minority neighborhoods for a long time. This neglect and disinvestment led to crumbling infrastructure and lack of opportunities for the people in these neighborhoods. Homes in redlined areas declined in value, creating a wealth gap between minority communities and wealthier, non-minority communities. These neighborhoods usually had fewer parks and green spaces, which results in higher temperature and worse air quality. Less greenery and greater building density create heat islands. This means that temperatures are much higher in redlined communities, making heat-related health problems worse in these areas. On average, redlined neighborhoods are 5 degrees warmer than non-redlined neighborhoods. In some cases, the difference in summer surface temperatures between redlined and not redlined areas can be as much as 20 degrees. In Richmond, Virginia, neighborhoods affected by redlining have much hotter summer temperatures than areas that weren't redlined, mainly due to the lack of trees and green spaces. Let's look at a comparison between two neighborhoods, Randolph and Windsor Farms, Virginia, which are just a few miles apart but have very different surface temperatures, largely due to redlining. These statistics shine a light on the differences between these two communities. As you can see, the redlined neighborhoods of Randolph have a higher poverty rate, more impervious surfaces, have fewer trees, and lower home values. These two street views, showing very different levels of greenery and housing styles, were taken just a few miles apart in Randolph and Windsor Farms. Some of the differences between these two neighborhoods, such as more trees, shade, and wider streets in Windsor Farms, causes Randolph to be 10 degrees hotter on the hottest summer days. On the old HOLC maps, Randolph was given a low desirability rate of D, while Windsor Farms received a top rating of A. As a result of the higher temperatures that historically redlined communities experience, residents are also forced to spend a greater percentage of their income on cooling their homes, increasing their energy burden. Because redlined neighborhoods have lower property values and less political influence, they become frontline communities. Frontline communities are areas where people are directly and disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards, climate change, and socioeconomic inequities. These communities are typically the first to experience the negative effects of pollution, climate disasters, and economic disinvestment. Redlined neighborhoods frequently became sites for industrial facilities, landfills, highways, and other pollution sources. Increased industrial activity in these areas led to higher levels of air pollution, which causes increase in health problems such as asthma and heart disease. A study has shown that on average, Black and Hispanic Americans contribute disproportionately less to air pollution but suffer disproportionately more from its effects. Pollution is predominantly emitted by white populations, while Black and Hispanic people bear the health consequences. Black communities are exposed to 1.5 times more air pollution than white communities, and they are 3 times more likely to die from air pollution-related causes. The air in many Black communities fails to meet the air quality standards for ozone smog, and therefore, Black people are twice as likely to have asthma compared to white people. During the summer, when increased natural gas emissions cause ozone levels to rise, Black children experience roughly 138,000 asthma attacks and miss 101,000 school days each year as a result. Compared to white children, Black children are twice as likely to have asthma and 10 times more likely to die from asthma. Air pollution and extreme heat are killing people that live in inner city areas at higher rate than almost any other cause. Redlined communities are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, such as heat waves and flooding, due to their poor infrastructure and lack of green spaces. A paper published by the United Nations put forth the theory of the vicious cycle of inequality that occurs after climate disasters. This means that poor communities not only face greater risk from disasters, but also suffer more damage and have fewer resources to recover. For example, after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, lower-income neighborhoods received less investment for recovery. As a result, fewer residents were able to return, which led to even less investments in those areas. As we discussed before, historically redlined neighborhoods tend to be hotter because they have fewer parks and green spaces, but greater building density. This creates a heat island, which causes residents to pay more for cooling-related energy. Redlined communities also tend to have less access to clean energy technologies, such as solar panels and energy-efficient homes. Older houses and apartments in low-income areas have outdated features such as inefficient appliances, single-pane windows, poor insulation, air leaks, and outdated, inefficient technologies. These issues result in higher energy costs for the people in redline communities, increasing their energy burden. Energy burden is the percentage of a household's income that goes towards paying energy bills. There is a disproportionate energy burden on BIPOC households. ACEEE's 2020 research found that low-income Black, Hispanic, and Native American households all face dramatically higher energy burdens, spending a greater portion of their income on energy bills than the average household. High energy burdens are correlated with greater risk for respiratory disease, increased stress and economic hardship, and difficulty moving out of poverty. Unfortunately, there is a coverage gap between low-income households that qualify for government help and high-income households that can afford to make home energy upgrades on their own. This gap makes it nearly impossible for many people to make energy-efficient improvements to their homes. Even the best energy efficiency programs only reach about 2% of the customers each year, and most don't help the majority of utility customers, like renters, people with poor credit, and low to middle income households. These groups end up paying higher energy bills but still don't get access to the help they need. For households that don't qualify for government assistance, they often have to rely on traditional financing options like green loans or upfront payments, but these require good credit and high income, which many low to middle income families don't have. This leaves them with no options for financing energy efficient upgrades. As a result, many households that could benefit most from the energy efficiency improvements are unable to make them due to this coverage gap. In the US, lighting represents about 20% of the average household's energy bills. Energy efficient bulbs are often less available and more expensive in high poverty areas. These higher prices make the barrier to entry for energy efficiency higher for low-income homes. As a result, low-income households end up paying more for energy. Additionally, charging deserts, areas without enough electric vehicle charging stations, make it harder for residents of non-white communities to adopt clean energy technologies like EVs. As the cost of gas increases, white communities will reap the benefits of cheaper electricity, while Black and Latino communities will shoulder the burden of more expensive fossil fuel. The legacy of redlining has embedded systemic barriers that make it harder to improve environmental conditions in these areas, keeping cycles of poverty and environmental degradation going. Systemic racism refers to the policies and practices that exist across society or within organizations which result in continued unfair advantages to some people while treating others unfairly and harmfully based on race. The long-term and ongoing effects of systemic racism make existing problems even worse. One example is the lack of representation of people of color in the environmental industry, which helps maintain the status quo. Even though there is a lack of representation of people of color in the environmental industry, Hispanic, Latino, and Black adults are actually more likely than white adults to be concerned about climate change. This difference in concern may be linked to the fact that they experience the effects of climate change more directly in their neighborhoods, homes, and health. The more people see and feel the impact of climate change in their daily lives, the more real it becomes to them. This makes them more likely to be committed to sustainability and willing to take action to help reduce climate change. Hispanic, Latino, and Black Americans are more likely than white Americans to join efforts to convince elected officials to take action against global warming. They're also more willing to take action themselves to help fight climate change. Collateral consequences are an underlying reason why there are so few Black people working in the sustainability industry. Collateral consequences are legal and regulatory sanctions and restrictions that limit or prohibit people with criminal records from accessing employment, occupational licensing, housing, voting, education, and other opportunities. In the U.S., there are over 45,000 collateral consequences of being incarcerated, and they most commonly affect employment and professional licenses. 39 states have collateral consequences that limit job and licensing opportunities for people with criminal records. Since Black people are disproportionately affected by incarceration, 1 in 3 Black men born in 2001 is expected to be incarcerated in their lifetime. This creates a barrier for Black people to enter fields like the clean energy industry. For example, trade professionals are essential for the clean energy transition, but many Black people can't get the professional licenses needed for these jobs due to collateral consequences. This may be a part of the reason why Black people are underrepresented in the solar workforce. Similarly, there is low adoption of solar in Black communities, and this remains true even when income levels are similar, meaning that cost is not the only factor. Now let's talk about environmental justice. It's important to understand that equity and justice are not the same. Equity gives people additional tools to help them deal with inequity, but doesn't fix the root cause of the problem. When talking about equity and justice, we also have to remember the historical context. Centuries of inequality have created uneven playing fields, so some communities have more disadvantages than others from the start. Dr. Robert Bullard, often called the father of environmental justice, explains that environmental justice embraces the principle that all people in communities are entitled to equal protection of our environmental laws, housing, transportation, energy, food, and water security and health laws. Dr. Bullard's definition strikes at the core of environmental justice, that all people have the right to clean, affordable, sustainable, and healthy environments. His definition highlights that it's not just about creating and enforcing laws, but also making sure that the outcomes of these laws actually protect everyone equally. Confronting environmental racism with environmental justice is called intersectional environmentalism. Intersectional environmentalism is a more inclusive approach to environmentalism that fights for the protection of both people and the planet. It recognizes that injustices done to both marginalized communities and the environment are connected. This approach focuses on addressing the injustices faced by the most vulnerable communities while also protecting the environment. It does not minimize or silence social inequality. Instead, it pushes for justice for both people and the planet together. Now let's discuss some of the ways that we can begin to address challenges related to environmental racism and systemic inequity, and move towards a more just and equitable decarbonized future. Creating change in our existing legislative system is one way of working towards environmental justice. Two examples of significant policy solutions are the Justice 40 Initiative and California's SB 535. Both policies are designed to address historical and systemic environmental injustices. By directing resources and investments to disadvantaged communities, these policies aim to create equitable opportunities for clean energy access, economic development, and improved public health. The Justice 40 Initiative is a federal government policy. Its goal is to ensure that 40% of overall benefits of federal investments in climate change and clean energy are directed to disadvantaged communities that are impacted by pollution. The Justice 40 Initiative seeks to create sustainable, long-term benefits through improved infrastructure, job creation, and environmental cleanup. California SB 535 was signed into law in 2012 and requires that 25% of revenue from California's cap-and-trade emissions benefit disadvantaged communities by reducing pollution, improving air quality, creating jobs, and enhancing public health. Cities are also shifting their policy focus to equity and decarbonization. For example, the city of LA recently published a report on equitable building decarbonization. Investing in efficiency improvements is a much better long-term solution than helping pay for people's monthly energy bills. Investing in efficiency improvements can reduce a community's energy burden and improve its resilience when energy prices increase. However, more policy changes are needed in order to get an equitable and decarbonized future. For example, current federal government assistance for low-income housing provides bill payment assistance for energy bills. But what if, instead, that money was used for energy efficiency retrofits? This would lower utility bills, reducing or eliminating the need for future bill assistance, while also having many other positive impacts, such as improved temperature control, better indoor air quality, and better health outcomes. Tariff-based financing is an innovative way to fund energy efficiency and renewable energy upgrades, where the cost of the upgrades are repaid through a charge on the resident's energy bill. This approach allows property owners to pay for their energy upgrades over time while using their savings they get from reduced energy usage to help pay for their upgrades. Traditional financing options often require good credit scores and significant upfront capital, both of which can be barriers for low-income households. Tariff-based financing eliminates the need for upfront payments and credit checks, making it more accessible to a broader range of residents. Since the repayment requirement is tied to the utility meter for each property, it doesn't show up as debt on the homeowner's credit report. This feature makes it less risky for residents and does not affect their ability to borrow for other needs. The energy bill savings from efficiency upgrades typically exceed the cost of the improvements. This reduces the overall energy expenses for households. This model helps reduce the energy burden on low-income households while allowing them to save money. Many companies and initiatives are trying to provide equitable decarbonization solutions, such as Gemini Energy Solutions and their partnerships with Black churches, the Greenlining Institute, We Want Green Too, Solar Stewards, Finger Lakes Climate Fund, Groundswell, We Solar, Pueblo, and Grid Alternatives. These companies and initiatives represent a wide range of concepts and ideas with a focus on Black-owned businesses and Black-led initiatives. Another solution is affordable decarbonized housing. The following two housing developments are energy-efficient, all-electric buildings that are accessible to low-income communities. St. Peter's Affordable Housing is located in New Orleans, Louisiana, and is net zero energy. 7th and Campbell Affordable Housing is located in Oakland, California, and is all-electric and very energy efficient. As we've seen in this video, the links between environmental justice and building decarbonization are critical to understanding how we can help make sure that the transition to a decarbonized future is just and equitable. If you want to learn more about environmental justice and building decarbonization, check out the Stanford BDLA website where you can access free case studies, slide decks, as well as other videos and resources. The Stanford BDLA is a nonprofit organization that helps future architects, engineers, and construction managers learn about building decarb. Teachers can access these resources on the BDLA website and use them in their existing classes. The BDLA also hosts virtual workshops and collaborates with colleges and universities on a wide variety of building-related topics. Thank you very much.